It was the fall of 1998. The leaves in rural Oregon had turned brilliant shades of yellow and red, creating a scene that was both beautiful and somehow melancholic. My name has been changed to Michael, along with two close friends, Kevin and Sarah, decided to hike through the woods to explore less-known trails around the area of Lake Serenity, named changed to protect identity. This lake was known for its remoteness and wild beauty, but also for dark rumors that local kids often whispered about. We, being 18, 20 years old, full of energy and curiosity, didn't pay much attention to those ghostly tales. We walked deep into the forest, the dry leaves crunching under our feet, the air cool and damp. After about an hour of hiking, Kevin, who was always leading and loved exploring, suddenly stopped. "Look," he said, pointing through the trees. Through a clearing in the woods, we saw a lake, not the crowded beach area we usually went to, but a small, secluded, and strangely quiet branch, and right beside the lake shore, nestled under giant old pine trees, was a wooden cabin. It was an old, dilapidated wooden cabin, its boards faded, some peeling off, windows boarded up with rough planks, a stone chimney partially collapsed. It looked like it had been abandoned for a very long time. Covered in moss and vines. A cold sensation, unrelated to the weather, suddenly washed over me. Sarah, the most cautious in the group, said softly, "It looks creepy." Kevin, on the other hand, his eyes lit up with excitement. "Awesome, let's see. I wonder what's inside." "Don't, Kevin," Sarah said quietly. "It doesn't look right at all." I also felt a little uneasy. That lake, with its surface as calm as a mirror but dark under the shadow of the trees, and that silent house, created an oppressive atmosphere that was hard to describe. "I think Sarah's right," I said, my voice slightly hesitant. "It looks not very welcoming." But Kevin, with his daring nature, walked towards the cabin. "Come on, just a look. Maybe it's just an old abandoned vacation cabin." Sarah and I exchanged glances, sighed, and reluctantly followed. As we got closer, the smell of rotting wood, damp earth, and another smell, harder to describe, like old metal or something decaying, filled our noses, sending shivers down my spine. The front door was locked, but one of the back windows had broken glass and the plank boarding it up was rotten. Kevin easily pried it open. He looked inside, then turned to us with a curious smile. "Let's go in." Sarah hesitated, but eventually followed Kevin inside. I was the last one, stepping over the low windowsill. I felt like I had just crossed an invisible boundary. Inside was dark, dusty, and the smell of mold was heavy. Weak light filtered through the cracks in the door and holes in the roof, illuminating dust motes suspended in the air. Furniture inside was still there, covered in white sheets, but looked rotten and dilapidated. As we went deeper into the house, our quiet footsteps on the old wooden floor created unnerving creaking sounds. The feeling of being watched became stronger and stronger. I felt like someone was hiding in the shadows, observing our every move. Sarah gently squeezed my arm, her face slightly pale. I don't really like it in here." Kevin was rummaging around in the dilapidated kitchen. Suddenly, a sound came from upstairs, like heavy footsteps. We instantly froze, holding our breath, listening. The footsteps stopped, then a prolonged creak, like someone dragging something heavy across the floor. "Is someone up there?" Sarah whispered. Kevin, his face no longer showing excitement, but caution instead. "No way. This house is clearly abandoned." The sound stopped. Only terrifying silence remained. We stood there, hearts pounding, listening for even the smallest sound. The oppressive and cold feeling in this house intensified, the air seeming to thicken. We looked at each other. No one spoke, but we all had the same thought: we didn't belong here. We quickly left the wooden cabin, not saying a word to each other until we were out of the woods and back on the familiar road. The sunlight and fresh air outside seemed to somewhat dispel the gloomy atmosphere of the house. But the feeling of unease still lingered. Kevin tried to break the silence. "Well, gotta admit it was a bit creepy. But kinda exciting too." Sarah remained silent, her face worried. As for me, I still felt the coldness that had invaded me inside that house. When I got home, I tried to forget everything. But I couldn't. The feeling of being watched clung to me. That night, I started having strange dreams. I dreamt I was back in that wooden cabin. But it wasn't as dilapidated as it had been during the day. It was bright, warm, but something was off. Then the scene abruptly turned chaotic, shouting, objects crashing, the screaming of children. I saw figures running wildly in the darkness. And a feeling of absolute terror enveloped me. I woke up with my heart pounding and gasping for air. Strange things continued to happen in my house. First, I started smelling weird scents. Sometimes it was the smell of old dust and rotting wood, exactly like the smell inside the wooden cabin. Sometimes it was a metallic, unpleasant smell, like rusty metal or something else. This smell would come and go, leaving me feeling restless and uncomfortable. Then I started seeing small objects, unrelated to me, appearing in my room. A piece of rotten wood placed on the nightstand. An old button mixed in with clean clothes. A small, sharp stone, appearing in my shoe. Those things. They looked like things you could find inside the abandoned wooden cabin. I wondered if Kevin had brought something back from there. But when I asked, both Kevin and Sarah said they didn't take anything. The most terrifying was the sounds. I started hearing small noises in the house at night, like creaking footsteps on the wooden floor. The faint sound of objects being moved. They didn't come from a specific place, but echoed from everywhere in the house. Sometimes downstairs, sometimes upstairs, sometimes right outside my room door. I knew, somehow, that wooden cabin, or something from within it, had followed us back. The disturbances became more and more intense. Focusing on recreating the atmosphere and sounds from the cabin, I started hearing crying, the soft, mournful crying of children, echoing from somewhere in the house. At first, the sound was very faint, easily mistaken for wind or noise from the neighbors. But gradually it became clearer, more insistent. The crying sounded like it was coming from inside the walls, from under the floor, as if those children were trapped somewhere nearby. Along with the crying were other terrifying sounds. Sometimes I heard objects being thrown forcefully. The sound of wood splintering. Heavy impacts. Exactly like the sounds of a struggle, of violence. These sounds often appeared late at night, when I was trying to sleep, jolting me awake, my heart pounding in the darkness. The haunting wasn't just limited to sounds. I started seeing fleeting images. The shadows of small figures, like children, darting through the hallway at night. For a moment, I saw a pale face, eyes wide with terror, staring at me through the crack in my bedroom door, then disappearing instantly. These images only appeared for a split second, leaving me constantly wondering if I was hallucinating from lack of sleep and stress. Both Kevin and Sarah also began to experience similar things, although perhaps not as intensely as I did. Kevin said he heard footsteps in his house when he was alone. Sarah said she smelled the unpleasant odor and felt like someone was touching her hair while she was sleeping. We started talking more seriously about what was happening, the initial skepticism gradually disappearing, replaced by growing fear. I began to investigate the history of that wooden cabin more thoroughly. This time looking for more specific information. I searched online news archives, using the name Lake Serenity and keywords related to disappearance, murder, abandonment, and then, I found it, a series of old newspaper articles, from about 20 years prior, detailing a shocking crime that occurred at that very wooden cabin by the lake in the winter of 1979. The article recounted a horrific massacre that took place at the wooden cabin by the lake in the winter of 1979. A man named Robert, name changed, described as having psychological issues after his business failed, had murdered his wife and 2 young children with a hammer. then killed himself with a gun right in the living room. Their bodies were discovered a few days later by a neighbor passing by. The house was subsequently sealed, put up for sale, but no one dared to buy it, and it gradually fell into disrepair, becoming a haven for chilling rumors. The details of the crime sent shivers down my spine. His wife was murdered in the bedroom. One daughter, about 7 years old, was killed in the kitchen. And the youngest son, about 5 years old, was murdered right in the living room. Where Robert committed suicide, the sounds we heard, the crying of children, the impacts, the heavy footsteps, it all matched exactly what had happened in that house. It turned out, we hadn't just explored an abandoned house. We had walked straight into a crime scene still heavily haunted by angry and suffering spirits. When we shared this information with each other, our fear intensified tenfold. Now, we knew who we were dealing with, not just a simple ghost, but the souls of people who had died a brutal death, and perhaps, the hateful soul of the very person who committed the crime. The disturbances after we learned the truth became more aggressive and personal. Objects in the house were moved, no longer small items, but heavy furniture, thrown to the floor with great force. Doors, cabinet doors would open and slam shut by themselves. I started seeing streaks of dark red liquid, looking like dried blood, appearing on the floor or on the walls. Although they only lingered for a few seconds then vanished. The psychological torment also reached its peak. I began to doubt myself, doubt my friends. My dreams became violently realistic and terrifying. I saw myself in the position of the victims, experiencing the same fear and utter pain. The feeling of someone whispering in my ear. Not crying, but threats or incomprehensible, angry words. Everything escalated so quickly that we couldn't react. My house became the center of the haunting. One night, as the three of us were trying to figure out a solution, everything went into chaos. The lights in the house flickered incessantly then went out, leaving us in pitch darkness. The temperature in the room dropped suddenly, icy cold like winter. Then the sounds began, not small noises anymore, but a horrifying symphony of death. Heavy footsteps upstairs, the piercing screams of a woman, the desperate cries of children, the sound of objects shattering, the heavy thud of a hammer, and finally the sound of a gunshot, all echoing throughout the house, like a terrifying film being replayed right around us. In the darkness, we felt ourselves being touched. Cold, rough hands grabbed our ankles, pulling hard. Small, icy fingers lightly scratched our hands, our faces. It felt like multiple entities were in the room with us, angry, suffering, and wanting us to experience the horror they had gone through. I heard Kevin cry out in pain, Sarah sob in terror. I felt a strong force shove me to the floor, my head hitting something hard, leaving me dizzy. In the dim light, I saw blurry, sinister shapes in the darkness. A tall figure, holding something like a hammer, loomed in the doorway. Smaller figures, huddled and trembling in the corners of the room. It felt like time stood still. We were trapped in the nightmare of that family. The air was thick with the smell of blood and fear. I tried to get up, stumbling in the darkness, looking for a way out. I heard Kevin struggling, Sarah crying out our names. Somehow, we managed to find our way out of the house, running wildly outside, not daring to look back, not caring about leaving everything behind. It felt like the whole house was chasing us. We ran to the car, locked the doors, gasping for breath, our hearts pounding like they would burst. Looking back at the house, it stood silent in the darkness, looking terrifyingly normal, as if nothing had happened. We escaped that house that night, and never dared to go back. But we didn't escape its haunting. The incident left permanent psychological scars on all three of us. Kevin became quiet and easily startled. Sarah had recurring nightmares and feared the dark. As for me, I could never get the images and sounds of that night out of my head. The disturbances are no longer as intense and direct as before, but they are still there, lurking in our lives. Sometimes, on quiet late nights, I still hear the very faint crying of children, echoing from afar. Sometimes, I still catch a fleeting glimpse of a small shadow flitting across my vision. A sudden cold spot appears in the room, or the smell of rotting wood and metallic blood wafts through my nose. Every time I read news about abandoned houses, family murders, or drive past a quiet lake in the evening, I shiver, remembering, I know that the horror stories online, in newspapers, are not always fiction. There are places, stories, that exist for real, carrying a weight of pain and anger that cannot be released. The cabin by Lake Serenity still stands there, silent, dilapidated, a grim monument to the tragedy that occurred. And the souls trapped inside, they are still there, forever reliving the final moments of their lives, waiting for anyone brave, or foolish, enough to step through that door. This story is true. It is what we experienced. Perhaps you don't believe it, but it changed our lives forever. If you felt a chill, if you enjoyed true stories, unsolved mysteries, and unexplained supernatural phenomena, remember to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. There are many more terrifying secrets out there waiting to be told.